Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being. Welcome to the 34th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And as many of you will know, we are currently in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's not possible for people of any faith to congregate and be together. And this is especially poignant having just had Easter, Passover, Vaisakhi, and in the weeks to come, Ramadan. So in this week's episode of the Diverse Minds podcast, I'm going to be talking about the upcoming annual fast for Muslims called Ramadan and why it's important for workplaces and in fact everyone to understand more about it. And to join me on today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by the very esteemed Omar Salha, founder of the Ramadan Tent Project. Omar is an MA graduate in International Studies and Diplomacy and was awarded the PhD Nohud Scholarship for the study of integration of Muslims in British society. His first academic chapter was published by Routledge, entitled Diplomacy and the Beautiful Game, Muslim Footballers as Ambassadors of Faith. He is currently writing on Islamic public diplomacy and the quote-unquote otherization of Muslims in popular culture. Omar is a lecturer in international diplomacy and his research interests include innovations of soft power, re-Orientalism, decoloniality, integration, identity politics, Islamophobia, sport diplomacy, and the geopolitics of the Middle East. He has taught at SOAS University of London in addition to the Foundation of International Education and regularly delivers talks, workshops and lectures in leading academic professional institutions and conferences across the globe, including headlining TEDx Bradford in January 2019. He's currently a faculty member for the Islamophobia Research and Documentation Project, IRDP, at University College Berkeley and presents at the annual International Islamophobia Conference in Berkeley, California and Paris, France. Then, in addition to his academic work, Omar founded the Ramadan Tent Project in 2013, a social enterprise and community institution dedicated to creating spaces of belonging, dialogue and empowerment through its flagship initiative, Open Iftar. Ramadan Tent Project's vision is a world where all people belong and live together in harmony. And Open Iftar invites people of all faiths and none to the breaking of the fast to explore the Islamic faith and share the community spirit through food, inspirational talks, and engaging discussions. To date, Open Iftar has hosted over 100,000 guests across 13 cities and 4 continents, including groundbreaking, unprecedented and historical events at Westminster Abbey, Wembley Stadium, the British Library and Trafalgar Square. And for the past 15 years, Omar has worked with and consulted several community projects, NGOs, civic organisations, and international governments on interfaith dialogue, community cohesion, public diplomacy, and sports diplomacy. He was one of the first respondents to the Grenfell Tower fire and coordinated the Grenfell Muslim Response Unit, GMRU. GMRU went on to then be awarded the Pride of Britain Special Recognition Award by the Duke of Cambridge. Omar has been appointed as a Fellow at the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts and Manufactures and Commerce, the RSA, upon outstanding recommendation for his commendable work in community engagement, social innovation and academic excellence. Omar is passionate about servant leadership and social entrepreneurship. He's also a keen sports enthusiast, and his greatest achievement to date is scoring a penalty against one of the most successful professional football coaches in the world, Jose Mourinho. He's also a former member of Football Beyond Borders and featured in a documentary titled Over the Wall, a film about a London-based football team and their journey to play in Palestine. He's a regular contributor to international and national media and digital media and is featured in Al Jazeera English, TRT World, CNN International, BBC London, BuzzFeed News, Huffington Post, ITV News, Time Out London, Channel 4 News, The Guardian, New York Times, Evening Standard, LBC Radio, and now the Diverse Minds podcast. And Omar is fluent in Arabic, Turkish and English, so I'm so honoured to have you here today and welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Thank you. I'm really, really grateful for your time and your expertise. So I've read out your amazing bio and all the wonderful things you've done. And I wanted to start with the question, what made you decide to become an academic?
Well, from a very young age, I was always interested in critical thinking. Particularly around questioning theory and maybe looking at also how theory is applied in modern day lives. And becoming very, very passionate about how we look at data, So how we analyze data, how we also are able to have almost different conclusions, but looking at the same set of data, which I found very, very interesting. And I think that also enforces an idea that we have a vantage point that we look at the world from. We have various lens and a particular narrative and a rhetoric, which we are either entertained by or either we adapt ourselves as a philosophy of how we think and act and behave. So all of that, I mean, I suppose the sort of the anthropological understanding of how humans live, speak, eat, and behave, but also what does that mean in terms of the structures and the society and community that we live in. And so for me, the one area that allowed me to have that luxury to be able to think creatively and to also be a critique of the way we live. Sadly, most academics do so. Is actually to try and look at maybe research or contribute to some research which will be able to allow us maybe a particular expertise or in-depth analysis into a particular area. And so I've always been interested in this area. I mean, reading sort of books by philosophers and academics from I would say just before entering into university, I was always interested in that area. And so here I am.
Yeah, brilliant. And have you come from an academic family? So have you got lots of academics in your family background? Has it always been something that your family have spoken about?
No, actually, though. I mean, so again, academia. There's obviously the notion that you should have gone to university and written several books, etc.
Mm-hmm.
One of the joys that I've actually been able to discover is our ability to connect with different people, irrespective of their academic background, also assists in our ability to analyze the world and to maybe look at the world from a different lens. So not so much the sort of traditional orthodox route into academia, but certainly the ability to critique or maybe have a skill set where you're able to critically engage with a particular situation, whether that's looking at something on a micro level or a macro level. So I think I would say from our family, not so much. No, the idea that we've had a long list of long line and heritage of ancestors who've gone to university. No, but I think the best university is the university of life, I would say.
And thinking about then a lot of your research of the othering, I mean, you've mentioned it, and I think it's become very popular talking about unconscious bias, but I think you've summed it up really beautifully when you said it's how we interpret data. So everyone can see a particular set of data and look at that differently depending on their context and their cultural lens. And then in terms of your work on the otherization or how Muslims are seen in popular culture, I just wondered if there's anything you wanted to share, any sort of key salient things that have come to light for you or that you like to represent in your academic work.
Well, I mean, there's quite a long, extensive piece of area to focus on. We could look at the music industry, culture, art, food, social sciences, etc., and so on and so forth. I think ultimately we live in a world, especially today, where there is constant othering reference points. The use of language is to otherize. And what I mean by this is whether it's done by public figures, whether it's done by politicians, or whether it's done by people who, again, unconsciously doing so, it is a mechanism of breaking. And what I mean by that is the antithesis or the opposite of breaking is bridging. And bridging is almost a tool to achieve a better sense of belonging in our community. And it is quite interesting that when we look at earlier works of Hegel, the German philosopher, when he talks about the master-slave and his dialectic on this, is ultimately that the one in control cannot live without the slave. And what we mean here is not only in the sense of the slave trade and also what the British Empire and the US were engaged in that trade of itself, but also how that manifests itself today as well through structures and through hegemony and power. And I think that's quite interesting because ultimately what we're seeing here is a very different style of master-slave concept, not as one as direct in terms of power and how that is maybe easily seen publicly or illustrated through a master and a slave, quote unquote, but actually now through maybe the structures of power today, and who informs what narrative is being curated, what histories are looked at, and how also we inform our own understanding of the world. Where do we get our data from? What histories are we taught? What books are we told to read? What is part of our essential reading or required reading? And I think all of that aids into the discussion that how the object is perceived or understood is by definition as a result of the instructor or the teacher, by providing those tools for us to understand. And so with every lecture that I begin with, I actually encourage most of my students to question even the very things that I am saying in the class as well, because that is then the ability or the sort of the moment of salvation, I like to call it, from being shackled down to a particular way of thinking. I think academia in itself should encourage us to think, and rather it's about thinking and not about facts there in itself, but it's about understanding and questioning those facts in terms of not in terms of their authenticity, but what does this mean to us as a collective. And I think, you know, the data speaks for itself in terms of the increase of hate crimes that we have seen across the UK, across Europe, across the world. And yes, Muslims are the biggest recipients, unfortunately, of this hate crime, and disproportionately, may I add, because if we look at the British Muslim community, it's almost 4% of the UK population. Yet those receiving hate crimes, an increase of 300%, aimed towards Muslims. And within that data, if you want to then go deep and analyze that, a much higher proportion of those who are recipient of hate crimes are Muslim women. So that again, it's also interesting to look at when we speak of Islamophobia. There's also a gendered lens as well for us, which is important to look at that as well, because again, the hijab is a very powerful symbolic image. And I think if we look at symbolic power and imagery, then we refer back to Pierre Bourdieu's early works, when he talks about social capital that each individual has, and how symbolic power is a means of imposing recognition on others. So what I mean by that is we are all private citizens, we're all private individuals, and we all have the capacity to have that social capital. That social capital is our ability to influence others through non-coercive means, I like to call. And so that is only, you're able to do so once you have yourself obtained that social capital, whether that through be your means of being seen as a public personality or an influencer as such, a sports player, a politician, and so on and so forth. And I think it's only through, not only through that, but I think that plays a pivotal role in our understanding and the power of imagery and symbolic power in that sense. So in essence, what we mean by the power of othering and belonging is today we see a world which is in constant battle of trying to understand through a world which is compartmentalized the notion of power in various different structures. And it is our ability to ensure that if we are to live in a harmonious society, then there needs to be equity in how we are treated. But actually those very power structures in themselves, are they equitable? You know, that's another thing. We need to question that as well, to understand a bit better around our ability and how these power structures are run.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's so much to it, and I know I asked you a really big question, but I think for some people to understand and think about that, and yes, I've always said this around the hate crimes and also the gendered element and the sexism elements and misogynistic elements to hate crime against Muslims. So I totally hear that.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to your point on bridging then, and
Mm-hmm.
thinking about Ramadan, and for me, Ramadan is very much about bridging and bringing people together. I'd like to ask you, for listeners that don't know, I think it's better coming from you because I think you can phrase it more beautifully than me. But what is Ramadan, and also what does it mean to you?
Well, uh, yeah, as you said, I mean, the organization Ramadan Tent Project, its mission is to bring people together to better understand each other, and we envisage to do that all year round, not just only in the month of Ramadan. And I suppose this actually links then to what does Ramadan mean to me personally, but to us as an organization. And to
Mm-hmm.
me personally, Ramadan is, yes, we understand that Ramadan is the ninth month of the Islamic calendar. It is the holiest month of the Islamic calendar. And it's also the month in which the first verses of the Holy Quran were revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And so it is evidently a very much a blessed month. It's a month where Muslims who are observing Ramadan and fasting during this month are fully immersed in worship, are fully immersed in being trying to attain mindfulness and more mindfulness, and trying to attain a better sense of their surroundings, of who they are, what is their purpose in life. Um, what does it mean to be a British Muslim these days? How can I be a better human being? How can I be friendlier or more neighborly in my community? How can I give more charity? How can I maybe there are some habits that I want to overcome and actually introduce new habits into my life. And so Ramadan for me personally is a wonderful month because it's a month where you truly see a different sort of spirit in our community. Everyone is fasting, or pretty much everyone is fasting, and therefore everyone's solidarity with one another increases by tenfold, because we're all entering this causal community sort of habits where we're fasting almost 18 hours a day without food and water. Um, and so that level of empathy increases naturally, and level of solidarity, as I mentioned, but also a level of introspection, which is very, very important, because it allows us to think that irrespective of our social background, of our social status in life, if we are to go 30 odd days of fasting and from dawn to dusk with no food or drink, we all feel hunger. And it does not discriminate against anyone. A bit like what is happening now with COVID-19
Yeah.
is that it does not discriminate whether you are young or old, as we have seen, whether you're male or female, we've seen cases of this across the globe now, right? And so it is quite interesting that for me, I actually draw parallels between what we see with COVID-19 and Ramadan. And why do I say this? Is
Completely.
it,
I
it, it,
totally agree with you.
yeah, it draws us, it draws our attention to things that we may have taken for granted previously. What I mean by this is the mere fact that we only have this one state sanctioned exercise or walk a day, for instance, makes us think that actually there are some people in this world who are under occupation, who are not allowed to leave their homes, indefinitely, right? Um, the ability for us to walk out and whether it's lovely weather, we're able to go take a stroll in the park and come back. It makes us think more about um, the need to be much more diligent with our cleanliness, for instance, right? To take care of our elders, to be a bit more courteous to our neighbors, um, and I think that draws parallel to Ramadan, because Ramadan, what it actually does is forces us to rethink for that month of where our priorities lie, and are we spending more time with our loved ones? Are we checking in with them more often? Um, are we making sure that we are trying to be better human beings? Have we got closer to understanding what is our purpose in life? Um, and I think all of those culminated together actually is quite interesting because almost the same lessons can be drawn from this. And so for us as an organization, we aim to implement or uplift the community through that very Ramadan spirit that we all feel all year round. And I say all year round because, outside of Ramadan, there are now new initiatives which will be launching very soon. And the team have been working on now for several months. So before, in late March, we had the Welcome Ramadan conference, which was the inaugural conference. Of course, that had to be deferred, but we then moved that on to online. So we had pre-Ramadan webinars. And the topics range from looking at the moral economy of Ramadan to the spiritual understanding of Ramadan to mental health in Ramadan, and also the power of the British pound in Ramadan, the Muslim pound, we like to call it, and of course, community and social action. Elsewhere, we have a leadership academy, which is about uplifting and empowering our volunteers to become leaders. So there'll be workshops every month. And again, topics range from how to set up a social enterprise and, the concept of giving and how much can we give. And also a podcast channel. So I'm here speaking with you on this podcast. And I think the power of actually being able to connect with people digitally and virtually is actually a blessing, that we're all doing these Zoom meetings and online podcasts and Skype, etc., because it allows us to then look at how we can use technology to be a tool for us. Whereas often we have thought about, or maybe viewed technology as almost the enemy within, right? Within our homes and our society, where it consumes us as opposed to us taking back control. And so, our flagship initiative is Open Iftar, and that's been running now for almost 8 years. And to date, over 100,000 people have been hosted, and across 13 cities and 4 continents, and some notably in London, events at the British Library, the Wembley Stadium, Trafalgar Square, for instance. But the idea behind this is the tagline for Open Iftar has always been turning strangers into friends. Whether that is someone who is new to the Islamic faith, someone who is not spiritually inclined, but actually is maybe interested to understand more about this concept of bringing different communities from different faiths and non-faiths, and actually getting an insight into what Ramadan means to Muslims, and more particularly what Iftar means to Muslims, the breaking of fast, and how that is done. And that is an excellent example and tool of how we are bridging between different communities. Bridging is an excellent example that we often hear from several scholars, using in their works. One of the critical points that I very rarely see is that bridges are made for us to walk on. Yes, they are bridges to connect between different communities, but you also need courageous leaders who are willing to take that first step and cross over to the other side. And an Open Iftar is actually a almost like a center point of all different bridges connected to it, where you are inviting people to come. And actually, those who attend are very, very courageous, we would say. For us to organize these events takes a lot of effort from the team, but for those who attend, it's because of them that this has become successful over the years. That people want that glimpse of spirituality. It's almost a radically social, if I may say so, for hundreds of people to come together to sit on the ground and have free food. Especially in the way we work and live. We very much rush to work and rush back to home. And this is a moment where we can pause and reflect and actually look around at us and look to our left and right and those in front of us and behind us as we're sat on the ground to appreciate our differences. And this is the importance of belonging here, because the opposite of othering is not conformity. And this is where, again, it's very, very important we are able to distinguish between these terms. Belonging is accepting the other for who they are, whilst being mindful that we are a diverse community and that there is no right or wrong in terms of who we are individually, right? we all share or have different views, and that is okay. I think that is the vantage point we need to begin from, is to understand and acknowledge that we are different. And I think with othering, it is born out of fear of someone being different, and therefore you are not one of us. So this is the us and them narrative now being portrayed, and this us and them narrative is a form of breaking. So instead of we and then we have us and them, this is now what is causing that friction and breaking between different communities. And this is unfortunately something that we see quite often, in some cases in unregulated media, being pushed out, or even by some politicians that we have seen across the world who spout this sort of language. And it is unhelpful, because what it does is its effects on that in terms of our local communities, it further then breaks apart what we understand to be that community spirit that we all have experienced before. And so our challenge is actually to be to fight against the sort of othering and the us and them narrative. And we see ourselves, positioned in an area and in a sector which we want to promote, and we see ourselves as pioneers of promoting the sense of belonging that we need and bridging between our different communities. And so, yes, I mean, that for us, Ramadan, why it's important is because it's, we are driven by our faith. Our values are derived from our faith. And Ramadan being the holiest month, the Open Iftar was born out of Ramadan. And our challenge has always been about, well, how do we, keep that spirit going throughout the year? And that's something which is an exciting challenge for us, actually.
Yeah, and I love coming to Ramadan Tent Project. And when I came, I met this really amazing woman who was Irish. And actually what I found was that there's so much you have in common with people sitting next to you, whether they've been to an iftar, whether they know what iftar is, whether they know what Ramadan is. I think that for me was the real thing. I know it anyway, but that actually there's so much more in common, like the Joe Cox Foundation say more in common. And I think for me, I really experienced that when I came to RTP.
Yes, and that is one of the many positives and actually impact points that we measure, is when you leave, you feel almost your brand. Our brand promise is, when you attend an RTP event, when you attend Open Iftar, you leave feeling more confident, you leave feeling more optimistic, and that's a very tough thing to sell these days. And so we've set that challenge, on ourselves, and that's something which is possible. We want to make sure that people feel much more confident about themselves and optimistic, and actually being able to bridge between those communities, indirectly does that. You feel more at ease. You've actually, whatever fear you initially had has now been put at rest, and actually you've been able now to create those alliances, to create those bridges, and to actually be able to extend your arm, and for the other person to then receive it as well.
Yeah, and I feel that's very much the spirit that when you walk into that tent, that's what you feel. So how did you start Ramadan Tent Project? Because like you said, it's free food, it's a huge endeavor. I'm guessing there's a lot of planning permission involved, but how did you manage to get the project off the ground, and how have you managed to the longevity that's been there for 8 years and inshallah will continue to go on? How has that happened?
Well, I mean, like anything in life, you have a thought, you plant a seed, and you've got to take care and be extremely attentive, and immense perseverance, and persistence, really, to continue with your mission in anything you set yourself or set your mind to in life. And for us, as you say, it has been a very long 8 years, but it feels like it's been only 2 years. And I think
Really?
because I suppose when you're focused on a vision, and time will pass you by very, very quickly, and you're just immersing yourself in that experience. So it does feel it's very much satisfying. Don't get me wrong; it's a lovely place to be in. but also because you're always thinking about how to improve and efficiency and sustainability, etc. You just feel the years go by. But yes, we first started off as a student group back at SOAS University of London. And the aim then, back in 2013, was the very first campaign where we held a 30-day iftar event. And that became known as Open Iftar for the past 7-8 years now. And year upon year, we've grown and grown, and we've grown to different cities. We've even gone international, and then we sort of refocused on the UK. And now Open Iftar is the UK's largest community event in Ramadan. And so, Ramadan Tent Project as an organization was set up a couple of years afterwards. We then sat down and strategized and worked out, actually, as an organization, what do we believe in? And trying to understand more about our identity and what is it that we're trying to do which is different from others, and how can we add value to what others are doing as well, and how can we work in collaboration with others. And it became more apparent to me as an academic, but also someone now who has got a foothold in the community, to look at the concept of belonging, particularly for British Muslims in the UK. We've not really looked at, we've discussed at length assimilation and integration at length, but I think that defeats the purpose of belonging. I think we need to unpack what belonging means to all of us, not just the British Muslim community. What does belonging mean? And because we've seen, again, the data suggests that actually almost just over 90% of British Muslims say they feel they belong to Britain, more than any other faith group for that matter. Mm-hmm. And so, but it's quite interesting that most UK adults believe that Islam is not incompatible with British values. So there's a clear dichotomy there. But then, so my question would then be, well, what does belonging mean to those 90% of British Muslims? And what does belonging mean to those who are not Muslim? And I think unpacking that and working on bridging between one another was something that we found ourselves much more in line, in tune with, in terms of what we were trying to do. Because again, although we are faith inspired, we're not a faith sort of, our constitution is
based organization. You're not a solely faith-based organization.
Yeah, our constitution is not faith specific in that sense. It's open to all. Everyone is welcome. And for us, it's actually a gateway for a number of different audiences, if I can say. So you've got obviously those who are Muslims living in the UK. You've got, and within that, you've got British Muslims, as well as you've got international. So whether people are here as tourists, and actually what they experience through attending an Open Iftar is a British Ramadan feel, right? So it's interesting because most people that I come across these stories where people have traveled around the world and have taken sort of a detour into London in Ramadan for a couple of nights to come and join us for Open Iftar. And so it's very interesting that people actually have gone out of their, so actually made it part of their schedule to be with us, to have that sort of unique British Open Iftar Ramadan experience. They view it, and then they go and they they go on their travels. Then there's obviously the institutions that we engage with. So the various partners that we engage with, and that's whether it's on a state level or actually public institution level. And we've engaged with the House of Lords. We've engaged with museums like the British Library, Westminster Abbey, for instance, as well. And we've also engaged with local community organizations and charities. And so that's a very interesting discussion that we're having, because it's about what is there a space for Ramadan, or what is being said and done about Ramadan in these very institutions in the UK. And of course, there's the wider public, right? And that encompasses people of all faiths and none, whether they're individuals or whether there are those who are following us online, for instance. So it's interesting to see that the impact and the messaging that we are finding ourselves, more in tune with, actually why our mission today is bringing communities together to better understand each other, is primarily we see ourselves as an example of what that bridging looks like, and actually promoting the idea of belonging in our communities.
Mm. And given that we can't meet, of course, face to face at the moment and celebrate and have Ramadan Tent Project the way you've had it over the last 8 years, how can we all support each other, understand and celebrate Ramadan and have these kind of open iftars together in some way?
Well, it's an excellent question, and we will be launching our sort of new contingency plan. So we've been monitoring the situation very, very closely with COVID-19. And obviously the Public Health England advice and government advice, which is for the foreseeable future, and at least maybe until June, we're hearing that
at least
there'll be no public gatherings, or public gatherings are still will be banned by then, or might be uplifted in June or late June or early July. And again, the data that we look at in terms of the peak potentially is looking at just before, maybe just inside the month of Ramadan. So it's very important for us to take all of that advice, and actually we support, and we are promoting people to stay at home. And again, there was a joint statement actually that was done by the British Muslim Medical Association, and also Muslim Council of Britain, which was encouraging mosques to close down across the UK.
Yeah.
And so for the first time in many people's lives in this country, we will not be able to go to mosques for Taraweeh prayers, the late night prayers in Ramadan, which which Ramadan is famous for, right? I mean, you got thousands of people going to their mosques until the early hours of the morning. So that will not happen. And of course, public iftars, public gatherings of breaking fast will not happen, whether that's at mosques or people's community centers, or whether that's in the public.
Or in people's homes, in fact, because that won't be able to happen either, will it?
Yeah, I mean, people's homes, again, unless you're self-isolating, then of course you will need to be breaking your fast, of course. But again, you won't be able to invite people. Yes, you're right. You won't be able to invite family and friends over.
Which is a key part, isn't it? And all the food prep and all the community around that. Precisely.
And so what we are normally accustomed to in terms of the spirit of Ramadan has now completely been removed because of this pandemic, this ongoing pandemic that we're facing. So the challenge for us, as we've said, as an organization that we pride ourselves on actually bringing different communities together, what do we do in a situation where we're unable to do that, physically speaking, right? And so the question was, well, let's revisit our mission. And our mission is we bring communities together to better understand each other. And that encompasses both physically and virtually. And so for us, what you will be seeing yourself and your listeners is a very, very different take for us this Ramadan. So we're not actually going to, stop doing anything because, again, we feel that it's our duty, right? We feel that it's our, we are dynamic. We are passionate about what we do and what we believe in. And actually, we see ourselves as the go-to organization for cases like this. Like, what happens now? Who do we turn to? What do we do? And so we'll be launching something very, very soon. There will be a virtual element to it, and we still will envisage to have, probably even now, even more communities connected away from the sort of physical aspect. So that's something that we're still very, very passionate and we'll look forward to rolling out very, very soon.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'm going to include all the contact details in the show notes. So yeah, we can all find out what it is when you launch it just before Ramadan.
Sure.
And so given that people are working, well, many people, not everyone, because they're key workers. So that's one element of it. And many people are working, lone working at home or remote working at home or working in an isolated way at home.
Mm-hmm.
How can employers, do you think, how can workplaces, what can they do to support their employees during Ramadan when you've got skeleton staff and also people working at home and remotely?
That's a good point. And I think actually maybe it's also concerns people who, I mean, all of us really. I think, the whole question of trying to make sense of the new normal. I was actually, I can't remember the academic, but I was listening to a talk last week, which was talking about the idea of trauma and the concept of trauma being something which, you're not accustomed to, right? It's out of the ordinary. So
Not in the West. We're not in the West. And I think, like you said about people living in occupation or people in war zones,
yeah.
and how certain countries, if you think about Iraq and Syria, how they've been living with this for many, many years. And yet it's so new to us. And we can go out for a walk, like you said, but they can't. So I think you're right. And I think there is a bit of a collective trauma in the UK at the moment.
Yeah. And I think it for us, it's actually, how do we address that? How do we, maybe before addressing it, acknowledge it? Because I think some of us have, maybe expect us to just, it's a couple of weeks and then we'll overcome this. This is going to, take several months before we get back to the old normal, right? We're now trying to deal with the new normal now, which is we are, encouraging people to stay at home. And how do we then almost sort of refocus and change our lifestyle? In terms of the way we speak, we communicate, we meet people virtually, and how we shop even, and how we eat, and how we exercise, and all of these things, right? And for us, it's, mental health is going to be incredibly important, and a key area for us to acknowledge and to support. Families up and down the country who are now having to deal with, children being at home, as well as working from home. This is an interesting concept for many of us.
Yeah.
And also the fact that we're in each other's faces, right, for several months.
Yeah.
And it's actually how do we then, become kinder people? How do we become kinder to each other, and actually to be a bit more empathetic, and actually to be easier and softer with each other, because we're all going through something which we're all unfamiliar with, and it's about having that level of compassion. I think it's very, very important from our leaders, whether they're our employers or whether they are from those who are line managing key workers. That level of empathy is incredibly important, or even that's at home in our personal lives as well. So I would say, in addition to all of that, you obviously then got Ramadan coming up, and so Muslims will be fasting during this month. So, in a normal setting, if I can say, without this pandemic, we would encourage employers to actually work around particular working arrangements for those who are fasting, because most of them will be sleeping quite late because of the sahur, so their sort of morning meal, the pre-fast, pre sort of morning meal. And it's a matter of, well, maybe could they work some days from home and some days come into work? And I think now there needs to be an extra level of support, because of the fact that we're all going through this traumatic experience, and it's almost, how do we encourage that level of compassion between one another, and be ready to listen, be ready to make excuses, be ready to accept how things they are. But, one of the wonderful things about all of this is, in a sort of Slavoj Žižek understanding of chaos, and how he sees the world to be in a place where theory is actually best explained in movie theaters. And so the fact that we're unable to control this, the fact that we're unable to plan ahead, it's almost a lesson for us that in some scenarios we will have to let things be the way they are, and accept it the way it is. But that should then draw a level of compassion between each other. And I've mentioned this quite a bit, because I do think that is what essentially was what will get us through all of this, is that level of compassion and understanding between one another. And that no matter how much we plan, and again, I speak as a British Muslim who believes that everything that happens in life is by God's will. And for me, it's almost a lesson for us, as an organization, because we've been planning for the past 6 to 8 months for these events in Ramadan.
Yeah.
But also as individually speaking, as all private citizens, we've all had plans, I'm sure, to travel someplace during the summer holidays, or to do something for Ramadan, or wherever it may be, or even we had plans maybe to do something this coming weekend, for example, which has been in our diaries. But all of that now has been sort of scuppered, and because of an invisible virus, and that shows you the power of believing that what has happened, what is happening, and what will happen is in God's control. And I think that's is almost a level of liberation when you believe in that, when you accept faith for what it is, you actually feel liberated through making genuine tawakkul, as we say in Arabic, which is reliance upon God for what is happening. And so for us, obviously, this is much more sort of spiritual analysis of the situation. But then there's obviously the harsh reality that we also see, and I think it's lending support to key workers. It's lending support to donating to particular causes and emergency appeals, etc. There are stuff happening on the ground, so people are doing their bit to support. So I think it's about ensuring again that we do now have the support of government with employers and employees to ensure that they're not being laid off, which is helpful. But again, I think for many, many businesses, they will be, financial insecurity is definitely high on the agenda here. And it's maybe trying to look at innovative ways to then use the virtual world as a means of continuing our work and supporting others as well.
Oh, thank you, Omar. And you mentioned mental health a couple of times, and I think even when we're not in COVID-19 situation, Ramadan does push you, it does test you, and you had your webinar about mental health in Ramadan. So, what would be your top 3 tips for anyone who is going to be fasting and commemorating, celebrating, participating in Ramadan to look after their mental health?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing is for you to be easy on yourself. I think many people go through Ramadan feeling actually a sense of guilt, entering into Ramadan or halfway into Ramadan or even the last week of Ramadan, to say, well, I could have done this, I should have done better, I should have maybe done extra prayers, or maybe I missed the fast, for example.
Yeah.
And I think all of those things, actually the purpose of Ramadan is, it is 30 days. It is a process. It is a journey. It's not a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon, right? And it's a slow, steady journey where you enter the month, and when you leave the month, is that if you leave the month a bit more conscious of yourself, more conscious of the way you act and how you speak, then that's a success. That's a measure of success. And again, a measure of success can only be defined by you as an individual. You should not look to your sibling or to your parents or to your friend or to your colleague and see how Ramadan has benefited them, and then almost compare yourself to that, because we're all on a very different journey. We're all facing different things in our professional and personal lives, and I think we're all different human beings as well. We all have different likes and dislikes, and naturally, as we do have different likes and dislikes and different habits, we know how to control our desires. We know how to control and actually put realistic goals and objectives for ourselves. So I would say the most important thing really is, number one, is to be easy on yourself, right? And number two, actually to try and understand a bit more about you as an individual. Who are you? And what I mean by this is, do you get mood swings when you're fasting, for example, right? Do you prefer reading the Quran in the morning as opposed to in the late evening? Getting to understand more about your understanding, your connection with your Lord, I think is incredibly important. So getting to know yourself better actually will then facilitate your relationship with God and the relationship with your faith as well. And how you perceive Ramadan, I think, is very, very important. And then the third point I would say is, one of the interesting hidden wisdoms around Ramadan being 30 days is, when you do the same thing for almost 20 to 30 days, it then becomes almost a habit in your life, in terms of your lifestyle. You pick something up, and then actually it becomes part of your everyday to-do list, right? And I think, this is several work that's been conducted by psychologists on this matter, actually. And they've said, it takes around research suggests anything between 20 to 40 days. If you keep on doing the same thing, it actually becomes very, very easy for you to do beyond that. And so Ramadan is actually quite interesting because, being 30 days after Ramadan, you actually become used to fasting. And then so you almost find yourself, well, actually I could continue fasting, right? Or if you're used to doing the late night prayers in Ramadan, you actually become used to that, and actually you miss it post Ramadan, right? And so I think it's interesting that, in terms of a mental health perspective, I would look at it as using these 30 days as almost a foundation to what the year ahead could look like, right? Do not be too consumed or alarmed with the fact that it's only 30 days. If you haven't done enough, then it's too late. On the contrary, that 30 days is almost only the beginning, right? It's only just the beginning of what will be a very productive year ahead. And I think these 30 days can provide a foundation for us to instill good habits, to then rid of any bad habits that we may have or may want to get rid of. And so by end of Ramadan, we'll be in a better position to then take on the year ahead through this very much forward-thinking, outward-looking, and optimistic perspective.
Thank you so much, because I think people do push themselves really hard, and I speak personally, I do feel a lot of guilt, or you do think I could have done this and I could have done that, but I think that's a really lovely way to reframe it and think this is just the start of the journey of how I want to better myself. So thank you so much for that. Now I'm hoping that people listening thinking, okay, when we do go back to work, or when we are meeting face to face, I'd love Ramadan Tent Project to come and talk to us, or I'd love Omar Salha to come and do a talk for us. So if people want to contact you, how should they get in touch with you, Omar?
Well, I mean, they can get in touch with our team, and then we can book them in. So info@ramadantentproject.com is the email. And for those who are interested in to know more about what we plan to do in Ramadan, how to get involved, the website is openiftar.co.uk. And on there, you have details of what we're doing as opposed to Open Iftar. Of course, as we know, Open Iftar, the likelihood is it will not happen this Ramadan because of the COVID-19 situation. But on there, there'll be information on what are the alternative contingency plans that we're rolling out very, very soon. So the email to contact for any bookings, and the website to have a look at what we are doing in place of Open Iftar.
And thank you so much for your time and your generosity and your deep insights into Ramadan, but also, British Muslim culture, which I know we could talk about for much longer, because I've got a lot to say about that. And belonging, because we talk a lot about belonging in the diversity and inclusion space, but I feel like this has been much more of a deeper dive into that word that can sometimes be used flippantly. So thank you so much. And I wish you a very peaceful and blessed month, and all the best to you, your family, and RTP.
Thank you very much, Leila. Much appreciated. And likewise, I wish you and your family a blessed Ramadan, and also to allow us to experience and to reach Ramadan, and also to come out of it much stronger as a country and as a community, and hopefully to get through this phase that we're going through right now, and to be more conscious of ourselves and our communities as well.
Thank you so much, Omar. You take care.
Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye. Wa alaikum salam.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.